Hello and welcome to the I Rehab Podcast. My name is Nick Kane. Now, I'm very excited today to be bringing you the first instalment of Entry to Exit Careers in Professional Sport. This is our new podcast series. We'll be looking at breaking down the different stages of one's career life cycle and hopefully providing you as a listener some really great learnings and takeaways that can help you in your own journey in one way or another. This first episode, we'll be working through a very commonly asked question for those who work in professional sport around how do I break into sport? How do I get a job there? What can I do? What do I need to do? So we've got three excellent guests providing some great insights here today, and we'll chat through things like the motivation, one's values, the why behind wanting to work in sport, as well as some practical tips around planning, networking, and job interview preparations. And to celebrate the Career Series podcast, we have put together a 5-part package to really help and facilitate any clinicians out there looking to set up their year in 2026 and use that as a bit of a platform to progress your career from there. So this 5-part package includes one, $26 off your annual Masterclass subscription for 2026, a free downloadable self-assessment performer that you can rate your clinical skills and plan from there, a free professional development planning document. We have the addition of some tremendous lecture-based CPD content that's from our knee conference, Acute to Capacity, that will be added for anyone who joins during this period. And you'll also get access to attend a live career planning Q&A, or you can get that on demand if you can't attend the live session. Dan Howes from Collaborative Sports and sports physio Simon Hall, who's worked in Australia, UK, and the USA. That will only be available for a short period of time while this career series is running. So if you want to get sorted for 2026, head over to sportsmap.com and access the masterclass to get all that in an instant. Okay, and I'll be very brief on introducing our guests here, as you will learn more about them throughout the podcast. We have Chris Bell, who's a sports physio and the head of medical at the Western Bulldogs in the AFL. He's been there for close to 15 years. We've got Paula Peralta, who's a specialist sports physio, which is one of the highest credentials you can get in Australia. She's a national physical therapies network lead at the Australian Institute of Sport and head of medical for the Australian Opals. While Dave Clancy is a physiotherapist, CEO at Next Level Group, which is based around consultancy and recruitment in the UK. And he, in the past, has headed up the learning and development as a consultant for the Houston Texans, amongst many other things. So a big thanks to everyone here for jumping on and tuning in and listening. Big thanks to our guests. Hope you enjoy this. And stay tuned for episode 2 coming in 1 week. All right, well, thanks everyone for joining us here on part 1 of our new series around the career and career growth for clinicians working in high performance and professional sport. And this one's more based around, I guess, how clinicians can get themselves into high performance sport. And we've got some, a really great team of experts here to sort of help us guide us through that process a little bit today and tap into some of their experiences and see what we can learn from. So thanks everyone for joining us. And to kick us off with a question to sort of get us sort of thinking in the shape around how we got into sport. To each of you, I guess, what was one turning point for you in your career or a key time that you can think of that really helped you get that kickstart into elite sport and where you're at now? I might direct that one to Chris to start with.
Yeah, great question, Nick. And obviously everyone's got to start somewhere. So I was actually really involved in the amateur football scene in my first year of physio studies and really enjoyed that scene. And I had a moment of naivety and I guess some ignorance at the same time as well, not knowing exactly what was involved in trying to break into the professional sporting world. And I actually sent a letter to the club that I barracked for as a kid. And I simply just asked if I could go in there and observe and be mentored and contribute to their physio team. And I was pretty surprised to get a call back by the general manager of football at the time, who invited me in for a coffee. He was impressed by my enthusiasm and he was impressed by my ambition, really. And we basically had a chat over a coffee for a long period of time. And he essentially said if I was willing to contribute to the club as a sports trainer, that the physios were really excited to have me on board as a junior physio. And they certainly contributed a lot to the formative years of my development as a young physio. So that's where I started. And it's been a fairly significant long journey since, but really enjoyable one.
Yeah, that's great, man. It's really good one for one of those, because everyone probably is unsure if to reach out and should I do this, should I not, and you just went for it and it sort of really worked in your favour. How about you, Paula?
My story is a little bit different to Chris's. long time ago, I had a scholarship at the Australian Institute of Sport as a netballer, as an elite athlete back in the day, and that was the early 2000s. So the department then was, in its absolute prime. It was Craig Purdom, Peter Blanche, Andrew Moser, Leanne Rath, Karen Faulkner was around. So yeah, absolutely trailblazers in and around the AIS at that point in time. And I'd already finished 2 years of physio and took a 2-year break to pursue my dreams of playing netball, and then went back and finished physio. But it meant that I had established some really strong relationships, at that age, and in a different, I guess, capacity, athlete to physio. And I was lucky enough to, I begged them basically for a job in the physio department. That part's not too different to Chris. And yeah, I was lucky enough to kind of be the physio aide for a period of time in the AIS physio department. So it meant that when I finished and took on my Masters of Sports Physio and started attending conferences, I had this amazing network of absolute trailblazers that I could go off and have a conversation with. So that certainly opened some doors for me.
Oh, certainly. Isn't that, I guess, being an athlete in that space, obviously that's where you bring a great skill set as well. And I'm sure that's really attractive for employers, saying, I'm sure you can have that rapport with other athletes, know what they've been through to be able to work away, and probably dealt with a number of injuries yourself as well to get that start. So that's really interesting. And Dave, your background, obviously physio by trade, and now doing some more work around consultancy and in recruitment. Fill us in on your sort of kickstart.
Yeah, taking words from Chris, it is a great question, Nick. I had a League of Ireland job when I was working through my sports medicine masters, worked for a team called UCD in Dublin back in the day. That's what paid the bills. It was cool. I was kind of doing everything, pitch side, strapping ankles, going on a bus for 5 hours for a match on a Friday. But I suppose my real intro to, I would say, the next level, like elite sport, I was over in London, and I was given an opportunity by now a close friend in London to look at a French basketball player in Lyon, a fellow called Livio, who had a knee injury, ACL injury. And so I was asked, did I have a bit of French? How good was I with ACLs? So, 2014, something like that, I had an opportunity to go to Lyon on my own over a weekend and assess a player from what I thought was a good assessment, everything for biomechanics, competency on a court, subjective, objective, the whole shebang for this elite player's knee. What was really interesting was this player had been drafted by the San Antonio Spurs, and he was getting exposure in Europe. So that was a real eye-opener for me to go, oh, this is kind of interesting that there's players that do this. And that was, I suppose, a big network build for me, because it created an opportunity early doors for me to do more of that with the Spurs and ultimately with the Nets. But yeah, that really just made me look at Europe, made me look at the States, made me look at things in a different vein. And even if I was in London privately practicing with, each and every one through the week, there's opportunities to do something on the side and you never know where it goes. So that's kind of my start.
Thrown in the deep end, be fair to say, a little bit there, straight in with the elite athletes. All right, thanks for sharing, team. And as I said, I'm always really encouraging you guys to just throw questions across to each other at any point in time if you have a burning question. I was going to throw one, I guess, a targeted question to each of you here. And for those listening, some might be listening in Australia and in the UK and more when it comes to national teams, is, I guess, how can I as a clinician break into the sport you're working in? So I might go to you initially, Dave, and you mentioned offline there, a lot of Australians you're finding as trying to get work in the EPL and things like that. How do I go as a clinician, Australian or not, to break my way into a sport or an organisation like the English Premier League in the UK?
I think you need to understand why you're doing it. It sounds really basic. I ask a lot of simple questions at the start. When someone says, I want to work for a Premier League team, I go, why? Why now? What's the reason for it now? What's pulling you towards it now? Why do you think you're ready for it now? What's your job currently look like? What's the ideal one look like? Be that in the Premier League or a different rugby environment or the States. So I actually start with a lot of those kind of questions to get people to really reflect and ask themselves, am I ready and what does this look like? And actually, how realistic is it? I think when you set that foundation, you can then nearly reverse engineer as to, so you want to be a head of medical at a Premier League team. What are you currently doing out of Western Australia? And really do your homework. And I think also it's not straightforward, right? So it depends what you want to do, whether you want to put hands on someone, whether you want to lead, do you have the paperwork in place? So it sounds easy, right? I want to get a job in the Premier League. And a lot of people, in particular from Australia, they have a real high reputation in the world for sports performance and sports medicine for years. Teams are always looking as to, we should bring in an Australian because they're really good. That's just the reputation you have. But I do think for someone that's trying to navigate that transition and that move, I think those questions are important. And also personally, does it really suit? Like, do you have kids? Do you have a young family? Have you really thought about what this looks like? By when? So that's kind of where my head goes, Nick.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, some of those points that you bring up there are sort of the questions we're going to try to tap into a little bit here around, I guess, you three as people who would, I guess, play a role in the interview process at the moment. Yes, you've obviously come through the process before, but I guess what stands out to you as you know, a really good candidate and what character traits are there and things like that. So, and the why behind it. So we'll break into that a little bit more soon. So it's a really good start for us. And Paula, how about you? I want to work in the Olympics. I want to come and work with the Opals or the Boomers. And how do I do that? I'm a up-and-coming physio, building the right credentials, but where do I just get my foot in the door?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nick. And I think I'll refer to that as high performance sport, which is Olympic, Paralympic, Com Games sports. And often essential criteria is the Masters of Sports Physio or your APA sports title here in Australia. And there's obviously more and more physios coming through now, come through the postgraduates and a Masters of Physio, which is obviously a different master's degree. So to then fork out more money to do a Masters of Sports Physio is pretty tough for a lot of people. So as I said, that qualification sports title is pretty much essential criteria for probably 90% of the jobs in high performance sport. So that's something that's definitely considered from a criteria perspective. And then one of the other things that is often looked at is the experience in Olympic, Paralympic, Com Game sports. So, there's a lot of experience that is sometimes coming across from some of our professional codes that may or may not have a sports title and very experienced, but sometimes it's, one of the considerations is who's had experience within, I guess, that high performance sports system as well. So there, I guess, some of the, more experiential qualification pieces that are looked at as well. But, also to echo what Dave said was that around, why do you want to come into, high performance sport? And I think a lot of people think that if they come into our system that, the next logical step within that cycle is being an Olympic, a Paralympic or a Commonwealth Games. And it's not that easy to, it often takes some time in the system to kind of progress to those roles.
Yeah, lovely. We'll delve a little bit deeper into that shortly. And Bally, having worked in the AFL, so Australian Rules Football at the top level for many years and head of medical there, I'm not working in the AFL or I might be coming from Ireland and different areas, but I want to work in the AFL for a number of reasons we'll break into. How do I go about doing that in the first step?
Yeah, well, first thing, I think David and Paula have both raised really key points. You have to ask yourself why you want to get involved in the industry. And a lot of people have the ambition to, which is fantastic, but there's a lot of background work that goes into it and a lot of boxes and pieces of experience you've got to gather along your journey. And I think you really have to be passionate and have a genuine curiosity in one, working with elite athletes, but two, being a master of your craft and developing your knowledge base and skill set to a level where you're really going to set yourself up for success. And that comes with that is an element of durability and resilience from a mindset point of view, because these jobs are really rare and they're hard to come across. And so you've got to be willing to put the hard work in. And for me, part of the pathway I see is you have to get your hands dirty early in your new grad. So you've got a foundation of knowledge that you get from your undergrad. You then have to apply your trade and start to build your knowledge base outside of that foundational level in the early stages of your career. But then you have to elevate yourself and you've got to make sure you're working with clinical specialists and experts from various fields and build a really robust background of knowledge and skill sets to then be able to make yourself suitable for that more elite environment.
Yeah, so would you say by getting hands dirty, getting into the field in the lower levels, or just purely just getting into the physio craft? Do you think I need to be working in football or something like that, or soccer in some capacity before you'd look at me?
Yeah, so the clinical environment's a very different one than the elite sporting environment. And I think at an amateur level, sporting club level, you have the opportunity to really work with clubs and spend some time with their players in particular and work with the staff that are really essential to that environment. And so my advice would be to try and really get involved and invest your time into getting some experience at that grassroots level to grow that breadth of experience. But then instead of becoming a generalist and not having someone to give you feedback on what you're doing well and what you're doing poorly and where there are opportunities for improvement in your knowledge base, then to try and graduate yourself into an environment where you are working with someone who's more experienced, who can give you that relative feedback and who can challenge your decision making to really try and critique your top end knowledge.
Yeah, great response. You've almost sort of answered this question that I might throw at the other teamer, and it sort of comes more to like, what are teams looking for, what are club and organisations looking for in candidates around, I guess, the behaviours that signal to you that someone is genuinely interested in becoming and working in high performance and professional sport, rather than, I guess, someone who might be just attracted to the bright lights of it or the status quo. What do you look for? And I think, Bella, you mentioned things like resilience and the commitment and curiosity there. Paula, what are some of those traits and behaviours that you think are of high importance?
Oh, look, I think what Chris said I totally agree with everything Chris just said as well. Like, they have to, I guess, demonstrate investment and commitment to learning. And I think one of the critical things is exposure to people more experienced than you, which Chris touched on. So, a lot of early and emerging practitioners now are sort of, I guess, working in situations as an isolated practitioner, and that's just not going to challenge your clinical reasoning and your growth journey as much. So I think that's really critical. From a personal traits perspective, like, I think willingness to listen and learn, I know that sounds really straightforward and elementary, but it's so critical. And the skills to ask questions and challenge respectfully, once again with that, outlook to learn and to grow from it. And I think relationships are so key with multiple stakeholders. So I think that that's really critical as well. And just in terms of, you sort of talked about the status of the job, Nick. When I started working with the Boomers, I was asked to screen a certain athlete, and I literally said to Dave Hillard, who was the lead, can you point out which one that athlete is? Like, I was there to do a job as a physio. I wasn't there to fangirl or to do any of those sorts of things. And that's probably an extreme example, but you want to, I guess, you're there to do a really good, solid job, and part of that is working within a performance team for the best outcome for the athlete in the club. And so getting those sort of, I guess, messages and that message, across that's what you're about, I think is really critical as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Dave, if we've got Dave there, he might have just clicked off, so it might have popped up for him. You both touched on, Dave, anything to add there, mate, to, I guess, some of the behavioural aspects that you might be looking for when you're seeing physios and clinicians come in trying to get into professional sport over there in the recruitment process?
No, I suppose I think those questions have been kind of answered. I really like the kind of curiosity piece that Paul has kind of shared, openness and willingness to learn. I suppose just something I'd kind of like to mention is, if you know that there's teams out there looking for people, and it is a really competitive market, like as Chris said, it's not easy to land a job like what Chris has or what Paul has. It's really, really hard. So just to not forget it, I think creating, as much as people don't like doing it, and we find it hard, visibility. You need to, I think, not be too afraid, like show that resilience, show that toughness, like Chris said, to share your story out there a little bit and make sure it's up there on LinkedIn, because as much as we always don't like saying it, a lot of the time it's kind of who you know and network. And I did know that person, I might be able to reach out to that person, I might be able to ask that person to intro to the team. So I think not being afraid to try to give yourself the opportunity, I think is a big thing. And a lot of the time when people are sometimes reluctant or afraid to make that step, even though they have decided they want to get into elite sport, just kind of setting yourself up for success, I think, is something we sometimes don't spend enough time on.
Yeah, nice. I'm going to touch on two points come up there around how do we network, and also you all mentioned the learning and curiosity piece. And I know when I was in a role hiring physios, I really valued their CPD experience, or at least it showed that willingness to delve in and learn over a period of time rather than just sort of turn up and hope to get a job. How much do you value, excluding things like professional, university degrees, how much value do you put on a CPD history and record? Throw one to you, Chris.
Yeah, I think the CPD part of the discussion is a really critical one. So when we have a job come up for advertisement, let's say we have 50 or 60 applicants for each role, the CPD element of it's a really critical one, especially for the more developing physios who are entering our state league type programs, who aren't working with our national team, but who are working in more of our development programs. I think there's sometimes a rush to get their sports masters done. And I don't necessarily see that as a prerequisite into our environment in the early stages. I think it's really important that they do a lot of CPD and have the opportunity to consolidate that knowledge and spend some more time mastering their craft and learning off other clinical specialists before they then move on to their masters. I think they get a lot more out of their masters by doing it that way, the exposure that the masters program gives them. And so to fill that gap for the first 5 or 6 years out of uni, I think the CPD component of the learning piece is a really critical one.
Yeah, and anything to add for you, Paula? I know you're certainly back in the day an avid learner and one of the few physios in the country to complete the specialisation process, which is a really tough process for those not aware of that. But yeah, anything to add?
Oh, look, I agree with what Chris has said. Like, I think that clearly demonstrates a commitment to learning and, your own growth. And I think, that's really important from a clinical skill set. But also, I think, too, consideration for the non-clinical skill set. So whether it's a leadership course or a certificate or something else in that space, it helps to develop those non-clinical skills, because those skills are so critical for us as physios as well. So that's another consideration. Specialisation is not for everybody, but I obviously have a strong bias towards anybody who's been through that process, because it is incredibly rigorous. And so that's something that obviously would notice as well on a resume.
Yeah,
I guess just to add to that point, Paula, another really important part that probably sits outside of the more commonly known pathway through CPD is to try and really build a robust knowledge base. And when I say that, the elite sporting world is heavily collaborative and it works as a team. And so to be able to go outside of your comfort zone and spend some time with the orthopaedic surgeons you might be working with and learning different surgical techniques and the anatomy involved with each surgery, and sitting with sports physicians and listening to how they interact with their patients and how they diagnose and assess injuries, and sports podiatrists with how they assess feet, and the strength and conditioning team on how they coach and teach a lift and plan running programming. All these elements are really critical to survive and thrive in the elite sporting world. And sometimes the physio-centric CPD structure doesn't really cater for that. So I'd recommend certainly making sure you have a clear plan around those physio-related CPDs, but then also be comfortable to look outside of that and expose yourself to other elements of that professional development world.
Yeah,
I think
great
too,
advice.
Chris, as well, just the cross-sport learning opportunities. There's so much to learn from how other sports, do a number of their processes, structure, rehabs, similar injuries, different sports. Like, there's so much opportunity there for us to lean and learn from each other as well.
Absolutely.
Sound advice. I was one for you, Dave. I guess you mentioned around the networking and you mentioned LinkedIn and maybe being a bit visible and prominent. I guess two-part question for you. How do I go about that networking process? So if I don't have those connections, it's often not what you know, who you know type of thing. But if I'm not working in professional sport, and we're going to touch on this a fair bit in the Female Clinicians Career Series, where a lot of females aren't working in the sport and they're finding it really hard to break in because they don't have that networking space. How do I get in there and do that? That's the first part of the question. And I guess second part is, you mentioned being visible, and I think that means like social media. Can you be too visible? Can you be putting too much stuff out there?
Yeah. And I think really hard questions. Firstly, Paula, you hit on a big one, which I want to re-echo. I ran a course had a book in it. Like, we're taught the clinical stuff, don't forget the other stuff, because the other stuff, if you are trying to liaise with a podiatrist or spend time with orthopods, you need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to articulate your thoughts. You need to be able to build relationships and nurture trust. So I think that's a massive thing that, don't forget, you can learn and read and listen to other people and expose yourself to different courses. Back to your question, I suppose just share what's out there in that world. That's what you can do. So if you know 3 people on LinkedIn and you just set it up this morning, read about the area you're kind of interested in. Don't be afraid to share it. I think that's really hard, but I would compel you to lean into that. If you're trying to get into an environment that is difficult and it is challenging and there's pressure, you need to start somewhere. So I think if you're trying to find your people and build a network, you usually do that by giving value and sharing and not asking too much. I think early doors, and I think the world is a lot smaller. I mean, this call is absolutely proof of that. So don't be afraid to reach out. Really hard, really easy thing to say, don't be afraid, but makes a big difference. So if anyone listening to this today and they're going, oh my God, how did Paula get to where she is? Or how did Nick put this series together? Or I'd love to get Chris's sort of job at that level. These seem to be the kind of people that would be willing to maybe spend 5 minutes on a call with you. So a lot of people don't take that risk, but that's probably somewhere to start.
Worked for Valley. It certainly worked for Valley. Second part was, I guess, when it comes to sharing on social media and things like that and trying to portray, do you think, and it could be for anyone here, is there a level where I might be sharing too much, where it might negatively affect my opportunity? I'll start with you, Dave, if you've got anything on that.
I think it just really depends where you're at in your career and your position and kind of how comfortable you are. For me, it's easy to say to share. I work in recruitment. I'm trying to help people feel confident and comfortable applying for jobs they never thought they'd be able to go for. So it's very easy for me to say that. No, it's very different if you're an aspiring performance scientist, you want to be a performance director, and you don't want to piss people off or you don't want to come across as arrogant. That's a really sort of difficult sort of, I suppose, situation. So I think it depends, and it's very context dependent. And someone like Chris, where he sits, he probably doesn't need to do it, right? But the 50 people applying for jobs, maybe 5 of them too, so that Chris can see them. But I'd be curious to hear what Paula and Chris think to that one.
Yeah, maybe I'll just throw this one. When I throw it at you, Chris, I guess it more comes down to you doing your due diligence on someone you're about to hire. You're going to call their references, and you're probably going to call people who aren't on their references, and you're going to look at their social media. Is there something that could put you off from that?
The simple answer is yes, and it has in the past. So I think I'm not an overshare on social media, but I do like watching quality content if it's available. So, but I'm also really cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of rubbish content out there. And so I must admit, sometimes when I do have an applicant come across my desk and I know they have a social media presence and I'm not really aware of that person specifically, I will do a bit of a deep dive into what content they are posting and just see the level of quality that they're trying to represent. And so I think if it's high quality information, it can certainly help you and aid that discussion, but it can also work on the converse. So I think you've got to be really clear with the intention of what your content is that you're posting and be really confident, not arrogant, but confident in your level of knowledge and the impact it's going to have.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. All right, I was going to move away from that topic unless you've got anything to add, Paula.
I reckon David and Chris absolutely nailed it.
Okay, I thought so as well. I'm going to throw this one at you, Paula, and sort of stepping away from a little bit around the clinician side, but often when you're trying to get your way into high performance or professional sport, the clubs will, and let's say I've been offered a job, sorry, congratulations, you're coming on board, it's more of a junior role. The clubs will often set the terms and it'll be like, this is how much money we're getting, and you can, how much should someone be willing to sacrifice on that when it comes to time and money and certainty of the role to get into professional sport? And where, and if so, should they draw the line? Is there a point where I'm like, oh, well, actually, I don't think I'm worth that. I want this much more. Can I go back and negotiate? Or do I ever say that's, it's a tough one to say that's not for me when I really want to get in and go from there? Like, is there a line where you would draw? And then I'll start that with you.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, Nick, and I think it's going to be different for everybody. And there's times where remuneration's more modifiable, and there's times where it's non-modifiable. And we probably see that in our high-performance sports system as well. And so with that, I think, as physios, we all have a duty to the profession to advocate and to really kind of, help build, expectations around what's reasonable and what we're worth. But having said that, as I said, not all remuneration will be modifiable. So I think there's a bit of a juxtaposition, right? Because we're sitting here saying that people need experience to get these roles. And sometimes some of those, roles where you get your foot in the door aren't remunerated particularly well. So the things that I would consider that, are probably non-financial but significant gain is that, and we've touched on it already, it's that exposure to work with really experienced clinicians that have, been in leadership roles or are, real clinical specialists or, have a PhD in a particular area or have been, running club environments for significant amounts of time. So if you've got exposure and the opportunity to experience working alongside somebody like that, I think, that's one thing that I would 100% consider. And then, I think from a career perspective, like, is there opportunity for progression? Do the values of the club and the people that you'd be working with, do your values align? Are they similar? And I think, sport it's long hours and, we all work incredibly hard and you have to love what you do. And so I think, if it's an environment that is, a really positive environment and you're going to learn a lot and, potentially it is going to be a stepping stone for you, that's when I think, you'd be considering those aspects, alongside the remuneration piece. And we all know cost of living at the moment is, significant and it's continuing to rise. So there will be, a point where it's not possible for some people. And so I think at the end of the day, they're the things I'd encourage people to consider, and it is an individual decision.
Yeah, very well-rounded answer. I saw you were nodding a little bit through that time, Bally. I'm just going to slightly reframe the question to you in your role. How would you feel about it if, and I'm sure this has happened, or how would I navigate it as a clinician if you sort of offered me the role and initially it was range, let's call it $80,000 to $95,000 for the year on a pay packet salary, and then you've offered me the job and said, and it's $80,000. How do I go about that, and how would you feel if I went back and said, I want $95,000 for this job? Like, what happens? How does that sort of conversation go? Can people feel confident to do that? How's that happened to you?
So I'll take a step back first and just echo Paula's comments, because I think she answered the question really, really well. And from an undergraduate or new graduate point of view, you have to be really comfortable. And I guess that level of comfort carries through to the elite level as well, because you've got to be able to complete your job and give it 100%, knowing what you're getting paid, and you've got to be really comfortable with that fact. Because if you don't commit 110% to the role, you're actually going to do yourself an injustice. So I think it's important you do that. And at the lower levels, if that's not going to be via a financial incentive, I'd really strongly encourage you to set up a structure that's going to give you professional rewards. So that is regular mentoring sessions locked into the calendar. It's the facilitation of exposure to other sports and other specialists within other industries. And you really want the PD of those other clubs, the PD associated or facilitated by your club, to be a replacement for the lack of financial incentive. I guess in the AFL world, and in most professional sporting industries, I'd imagine, we've got really clear pay structures that are quite well defined by the amount of experience a candidate has specifically. And there is certainly often discussions and negotiations that happen as part of these remuneration frameworks. And as you've alluded to, there's often a bit of a bracket of where the initial offer will come in and where that offer could or should rise to. Sometimes it doesn't get there, but you certainly should be in the position where you have comfort in having any conversation you need to have to make sure that the remuneration is at a level that you're happy to do the job at the level of 100%.
Yeah, okay, beautiful answer. And Dave, being in recruitment, I guess, still you can lean off the questions I've just asked there, but to flow that on, I guess, and I'm writing my application in there and it says, what do you think I should be paid for this job? Or the question, what might be, what salary range do you expect type of thing. What do I do in those situations? Do I just go bang and throw it out there as the top level, or do I go a bit lower so they think they might take me? How much are people considering that? And and what other advice do you have to us around navigating that process? Probably coming from a lens for someone coming new into a role. I'm not walking in and being head of medical because someone's pulled me over from Chelsea Football Club to do it. I'm just getting my foot in the door here.
Great questions. I think we should definitely be repurposing the last 5-6 minutes to a lot of people I know who ask these questions all the time. I think a lot of the time in that sort of situation, Nick, it comes a lot down to what drives you. Chris said passion earlier, your intrinsic motivation, what you're willing to take, like what's this look for, where can it get you to? So it's a hard one. Like, I suppose my head goes there. Someone I know recently was applying for a job and asked me that question. What do you think, Dave? Should I go high? I think I'm worth that. I think I bring that value, but I mightn't get it because I don't think they have budget. And I went, that's not one for me to answer. Maybe, do you want to try it? I think a lot of the time, if you lowball yourself or if you feel you're putting it lower to definitely get it, you might be seen as the person that's gone kind of low, right? Which is just the nature of it, right? So I think we're trying to do a lot of work in this space, not just at that head of medical sort of example, Nick, but at all levels. And Rob, Pacey's done a lot of work in this as well, trying to get people to at least understand what sort of strategies can people employ and what are the sort of benchmarks for certain positions, like what Chris said. So at least besides maybe being able to ring 3 people and ask them the question, what do you think? With a little bit more certainty that I can try for 5,000 more, but if I try for 20, they won't even look because they don't have it. So I didn't really answer it because it's such a good question. It's such a hard question. I think it also, it requires a little bit of research on the team that you're applying for and that league and really knowing where they are in their life cycle and who's in that department. That will also give you a little bit of potential insight.
Do you think, maybe a quick one just quickly on that, back to you, Dave and Chris, do you think clubs, do you actually look at it that much? Like, I know it's a question that's often in there, like how is it an important question? Some people would sit on that for 10, 15 minutes and ask lots of questions, as you say, or is it just like a bit of a flick away thing? Like, how important is it and how much value do clubs put on it for you, Dave?
What, on the money?
Yeah, on me saying, I want this much money. To me taking that next step through, is it
it can't be it can't be top of the email, right? You can't start with that, because if I'm at a team, I don't know, Chris is at a team, Paula's situation is different to mine, but I will probably go, this person just after the money, right? Human nature, that might be the first reaction, therefore they've shut the door. So I think it's how you articulate it, how you frame it. I think a lot of the time it's the frame, so I think you can kind of for all these reasons, I think I'd like to see if it's possible to get to this figure. I think if you position it like that, it becomes a very different conversation and it becomes received very differently on the other side of your prospective employer. But I think if you start out asking for it early, you become it's the money thing, which might be the case at all.
Okay. Anything to add there, Chris?
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, it's probably it needs context, and it's probably very situational. So if it's one of the earlier roles in the professional or elite sporting system, you've probably got less negotiation power, and you've probably got less ability to influence that. And the conversation might be a $1,000, $2,000, or $5,000 uplift you're trying to negotiate, versus someone who's been in an industry for a long period of time, who's really experienced in their area of specialisation, who's being headhunted by another professional sporting club, and you've got a really clear perspective on what you're worth and what value you can add to that organisation. So I think they're two very different conversations. For the nature of our audience, for people who are trying to break into the elite sporting world, I think you're going to be given fairly clear guidelines once you do get to the professional environment on where the pay brackets sit. And you're certainly going to have the ability to discuss it, and you should be confident to do that. But I wouldn't certainly have a huge amount of optimism that you're going to get a really big uplift from the initial offer.
Beautiful. All right, nice to round that out. Now, so far, I think some really great conversation and tips coming in, team. I guess we've talked a little bit around breaking into the different areas you guys work in, maybe what teams might be looking for. I'm going to tap back into your experiences a little bit to finish penning out time. And I guess, to get my foot in the door and an interview at least, I think we've sort of touched on, certainly in Australia. Paula mentioned you need a master's. We talked around the CPD aspect. We talk around network and connections. So here I am, I guess I've just got myself an interview. I'm into the top 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. Give me one tip each from each of you in regards to preparation for my interview process or readiness to be there. Like what should I do in the lead up to my interview process so I am feeling good about my spot when I come in to meet you? I'll start with you, Paula.
Yeah, it's a good question because to pick one's probably hard, Nick. Look, preparation is key. And so I think, thinking about the questions that you're likely to be asked and having some scenarios to share, some examples to demonstrate those skills or those attributes, I think is critical. One other thing I would say is it's okay to pause in an interview and collect your thoughts because sometimes those harder questions are just sort of posed particularly to kind of understand your reasoning and how you can articulate your thought process.
Beautiful. Chris?
I guess from my point of view, it's really important you go in with great clarity on the position description and the expectations associated with the role. And if you're lacking any of that clarity before the interview, it's probably worth asking those questions before you get into the room. My interviews that I do with candidates are typically quite robust and comprehensive, and they do involve some clinical questions as well. And so, as Paul has alluded to, I think it's a good prep question to ask actually what the interview is going to involve and who's going to be in attendance at the interview, just to settle any nerves and to make sure you do come in full steam ahead and ready to have your clinical hat on if it's called upon.
Lovely. And Dave?
What do I add now? Make sure you know your roles and responsibilities. Chris said that. Your job description. Practice and preparation. Paula kind of said that. I'm just going to re-echo, I think, that last thing Chris said. Know your audience. Like, know who you're talking to. Like, so if it's the first one and you're speaking to your potential line manager, or if it's a human resources kind of qualifying call, the language could be really difficult. So I think just really doing your due diligence on who could be sitting across from you and just kind of bringing it together. I think a lot of the stuff there was really valuable. Don't be afraid to, if there's an opportunity there, I think don't be afraid to articulate something that's gone well, and also know the flip of that. Be well versed in being able to explain things that didn't go so well and how you managed and came out the other side of those.
Yeah, nice. This is like a little roundtable, like quick fire set of questions here. But Paula mentioned occasionally around a tricky question, and Bally mentioned the clinical question. What's one question each? I'll ask this to each of you. You would ask in an interview process to, I guess, challenge the person or stump them, for a better word, an applicant. I guess to just put them under pressure a little bit, and it might come back to the things we talked around earlier, whereby you're trying to differentiate, is this person really genuinely motivated, interested, et cetera, or more for the glamour of the job, I guess. What's one question you use or used, and you're going to throw it out there now so people will know next time you want to use it, that you would use the interview process? I'll throw this one at you, Bally, to kick us off.
Yeah, I typically like, because self-reflection and self-evaluation are really important parts of someone's soft skills, in my opinion. So I tend to like the responses to the question of what's some critical feedback or some areas of opportunity that you need to improve that you've received recently, and how have you responded to that feedback?
Yeah, good one. Dave, any experience or input here around whether you're doing the interview process or you know some clubs have thrown a curvy one?
I always like actually asking what would people say about you when you're not in the room. And then I usually say, take that any way you want. And I'm really listening for confidence, arrogance, humility, understanding of themselves, self-awareness. So I kind of leave it really open for people to take it any way they want. But I think that can tell so much about someone in that situation.
Yeah, cool. Good one. And Paula?
I'm going to flip it, Nick. So I'm not going to share something I'd ask at interview because I think I really like what Chris and David have already shared. I'm going to share 2 questions I've been asked at interview that were a little bit quirky.
Nice.
One was around what animal I would choose to be if I could be any animal in the world and why. So once again, very left field. And then the other one was more around, I guess, a business sense around how I would set something up, in a park to sell ice cream or something like that. But once again, I think it was just around to understand, thought process, reasoning, how to articulate that, broader awareness or the ability to sort of, take a balcony view on things. So, I'll just flip the narrative of the question, Nick.
I can't help but ask, what was your animal?
We all wanted to ask that question, right?
I actually said that I wanted to be an eagle because I wanted to take a different view of the world and see things from a different perspective.
Well done. Well done.
I like it. Good answer. No wonder you got the job.
Not everyone can steal that, okay? I need to keep something in my back pocket.
That's a great one. All right, and final quick fire on this for the sort of process. All right, we get to the end of the interview process and you throw out and you say, have you got any questions for me? What's one question that you think the candidate should ask you, or you've been asked a good question that you think adds value to them? We'll go Dave first.
What does excellence look like for you in this job? How can I get to a standard that you really want of me? What does that look like?
Good question. Paula?
Rather than say one particular question, I would absolutely encourage people to ask a question. So if there has been something in roles, responsibilities, expectations that's not clear, definitely I think it also demonstrates active listening and, those sorts of things and your interest in the role. So absolutely go in with your list of questions, and whatever hasn't already been ticked off, I'd definitely ask. I do like David's question, and I can think of a few panels that I've sat on that we probably, haven't been able to answer that really well around the KPIs and positions. So that's a great question. I like it, David.
And Bally?
No, well, David and Paula, again, fantastic responses. I think it's just really important that the candidate has all the information they need to be able to go away and, if offered the role, really put their heart and soul into the job and do it to their best of their ability. So position description, expectations, critical, comfort around the remuneration, comfort around the professional development and the mentoring are all really key elements of the information that they've got to walk out of the room really happy they've got a good hold of. That then is going to allow them to springboard into the next part of their career.
Beautiful. All right, team. I've got 2 or 3 minor questions to sort of round us out here. But Dave, you've got something time-wise, a time commitment you've got to go to. So we can thank you very much for your time if you want to shoot off now, if that works for you.
Nice to have that conversation with you all. Thanks very much. Nick, fantastic initiative. Chris,
thanks,
Paula,
mate.
catch up with you soon.
Thanks,
and
Dave.
we'll link you in, obviously, next level group. Obviously, you can help out our listeners trying to find positions both in the US and over there in the UK, correct?
Yeah, 100%. And if you're ever in Ireland, anyone, hit me up.
We'll reach out. All right. Thanks very much for your time, Dave. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
All right, team. Great work. We'll continue. So I'm going to throw this one. It sort of flows on from that, but I'm going to put it to you initially, Paula. Obviously, more targeted to female clinicians here and speaking to them. And as I mentioned, we do have one of these episodes coming up talking more around the female clinician and them not so much just getting into roles, but obviously the balance in how difficult that can be for some female clinicians working high performance and professional sport. But what should they be asking around a little bit more, or how might they tailor for a female getting into any sport, I guess, knowing that, whether it's family, whether they're about to start a family, is there things they should be asking around job share opportunities, more support around family support? And I guess we talked around earlier that balance you talked with, for the life and getting into the job early. I'm sure there's sometimes it's just probably too difficult for female clinicians with the balance of that families piece. Yeah, what do they tailor differently in these roles and positions?
Look, Nick, that's a really good question, and it's a hard one to answer because I think it's going to be different depending on the environment, the organisation. Part of me wants to express that it's 2026 and it shouldn't just be females that are expected to do the caring responsibilities for families. Like, part of me wants to express that because I think we've come a long way in that space. The reality is, though, it is often the females, family responsibilities sort of fall there. So I think I feel strongly that it's really important to get the right person for the job, and I think flexibility in role share should be, prioritised around getting the right person. I know that's not often the case, and even though I guess my commitments haven't necessarily been family responsibilities, there's certainly times I've gone to interview knowing that I juggle a few roles, trying to, I guess influence that the role could look a little bit differently, and that hasn't been particularly successful for me on a couple of occasions. And so then I really feel for the females that don't have that same sort of, I guess, flexibility because their family responsibilities are rigid commitments. I think. I heard a male colleague tell me recently that he's just got a role, and they said, we're welcoming you, your wife, and your child to our club. I don't hear that enough. Like, I thought that was really refreshing. And it was to a male clinician. I'm thinking, oh gosh, I'd love if female clinicians, if that was the message that they got. So I think, once again, and I think Chris talked to this really well earlier, like, it is context specific, and I think if you've got a young family and those roles, the family responsibilities sit with you, it does become hard. But I also think too, like, getting the right people for a role is so critical. So I think we all have a responsibility to think a little bit more laterally around, how things are staffed, and understandably though, an organisation has, they've got to fill roles, and they've got to, they've got to be comfortable and confident with how those roles are structured too. So I think it's still an evolving space, and I'd like to think that we're more flexible and open with solutions that involve the best people, irrespective of what that looks like.
Yeah,
I think we've got a way to
go. So, Belly, framing the question to you, I guess. I touched on Sally Cowan's research, who she's on our next episode in the career series, but that was around having most female clinicians working in female sports and not as much in male sports, and that's evident in the AFL. There's no females as a head physio in the AFL, and definitely more females than there was 5 to 10 years ago, but still, not a huge percentage, and none in sort of key roles. How do we go about improving that? And also within the space of AFL, how do we go about improving conditions so females can go on maternity leave and have their job supported throughout that process? And on the contrary, touching on both males, same thing. If we have males working in the sport and they've just had a baby, how do we support them more? Because often in sport, it's 2 weeks, maybe paternity cover. It's not like these companies that have 4 months, and to support families at home. What are some areas of growth there for us?
Well, I think it's been a rapid period of evolution in this space in the last 5 and 10 years, to be honest. There's still a long way to go, so I image Paula's sentiments. But in my environment in particular, there's certainly been a really big change and shift towards really trying to accommodate these types of situations, because it's a fantastic part of our industry where we do get to support both men and women in these in the welcoming of their new families and developing families. So it's good to see there is change happening, and it's happening slowly. What I would probably say is, as Paul's alluded to, every role, or everyone's got to be really comfortable with their role they're accepting. And for me, work-life balance is a really critical part of that conversation. And you've got to be really comfortable with the fact that it's a really fast, dynamic environment. And it's fantastic if workplaces can accommodate that. but it's also really important that those conversations are had up front, that the candidate and the workplace are really clear on the situation of what the commitment levels are and the expectations are to dismiss any confusion that might come down the track, essentially. It's very interesting in our world when we have an AFL women's job that comes up for expressions of interest, we're flooded with female applicants. And when we have an AFL men's role come up for our advertisement, we're flooded these days with AFL men's applications. So it's actually quite interesting which people are applying for which roles in the current age of AFL women's football really starting to get some momentum. Now, we have a really clear structure in place, and I hope other industries and businesses have a similar structure where there's a lot of cross-collaboration between the AFL men's and AFL women's programs. And within our environment, our AFL women's staff now feel really comfortable in our AFL men's environment because of that passive and dynamic exposure with the two programs working side by side. So I'm hoping that with structural change like this and club philosophies where they are sharing resources and knowledge base and there is that level of collaboration across high performance medical and coaching teams, that these boundaries are starting to get squashed and that this level of isolation between men's and women's programs and men's and women's staff working in certain programs is going to become a thing of the past pretty soon.
Yeah, thanks, Belly. Great insights and answer. And yeah, it's certainly an evolving space, and we can see certainly some improvements and keep sort of pushing that. So that's great to hear. Final question to both of you, and I guess coming back to more probably philosophically lined question for you to finish with and have a think about. But if you could sit across now from your younger self, so this is Belly trying to email the person at the club to get a foot in the door, or Paula, the athlete / physio early days, what uncomfortable truth would you tell yourself earlier? I guess not. So it doesn't need to just sit in getting into the sport. I guess now that you've been in it for so long, what would you tell yourself about that then? I wonder if I knew that, would I do anything differently? But yeah, take it any way you like. But whoever wants to jump in and take this one to finish things off.
I'll start, Paula. It's I guess to put myself in those shoes a long time ago, I'd remind myself that it's really hard. The professional sporting world to work in, it's not easy. It's really challenging. It's cutthroat. You're forever trying to climb the mountain because there's always going to be injuries and there's always going to be knowledge you've got to learn and you've got to update and you've got to try and evolve with current practices and almost try and look into a crystal ball with trying to prevent injuries as well as manage them. So the job never gets easier, even though you think it should when you don't have a big spate of injuries. Your hours don't go down. You're always continuing to try and charge ahead. So I guess I'd reflect on the fact that it's not easy and it doesn't get easy. But I will also say, knowing that it's the end of the chat, that it's incredibly rewarding and to work within an environment where everyone's striving to be their best and you're really trying to harness and capture the potential of an athlete and you're working as a team towards an ultimate goal. I mean, again, you've got to have a passion for it, but it's such a rewarding profession to be involved with.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Pally.
I've got one question for Chris.
Please do.
Chris, I want to know if you get that letter from that, young physio tomorrow at work, the letter that you wrote. What are you doing with that letter?
So I'll say that, you know what, I've actually tried to really pass it forward, and across my career within my role, I must admit I've probably employed, and hopefully my inbox doesn't get too flooded from this, but I've probably employed about 8 to 10 physio students who have contacted me similar to what I did to myself, similar to what I did in my early part of my career. They've contacted me through an email or through a letter, and I've given them a role as a sports trainer and tried to help them on their career journey through mentoring, through our affiliate programs and through our AFL programs. So I have tried to pay it forward, and I do often look back at my start and try and recognise how much it helped me and formed me as the person I am today, and try to look after those staff in the same way.
Yeah, it's I'll just touch on one of my experience. I still remember I was a year or two out of physio and I hit up the Fremantle Dockers, which is in the AFL, and West Coast Physios back in the day. So that was Mark Finnegan, Tex Walker and Jeff Boyle at the Fremantle, and they just let me come in and they showed me everything and they took me through, and I was just amazed at the generosity that they gave to pass that on. For me, I was loving it. I loved the network it had. It certainly helped me in my pathway from there, massively. And I've been really thankful for that the whole journey and really appreciated that. So it's an amazing, I guess, and I've tried to, when I was in a position like Bally, try to do a similar thing, because it did have a profound impact, and it was probably so simple and easy for them just to roll through and show you around, but it meant a lot to me. So that was really nice experience. So and Paula, what about your younger self?
I would probably say that I guess the vision and the goal that you have may not be the one that you sort of follow. So I'd probably remind myself that there'll be jobs that you go for that you really want that you won't get. There'll be doors that close or contracts that are not renewed, and they'll be really disappointing at the time. But where one door closes, another one opens. I know that's really cliched, but I firmly believe that's true. And I've probably found, a lot of my most rewarding experiences are in the sport that I didn't grow up playing. And whilst I certainly had some amazing experiences, there as a physio, I've had some incredible experiences in other sports that I probably didn't realise would ever be on the radar. So say yes to new opportunities and go along for the ride. And probably just to echo Nick and Chris, what you were saying as well, I've always tried to say yes to having a coffee with an early or emerging practitioner or jumping on a Zoom, because similar to you both, a lot of people gave me some of their time when I was an early emerging practitioner, and I think that pay it forward piece is so important, and I know how much that meant to me at the time. And so if I can do that to a couple of other physios along the way, I think that's a really good thing to do.
Love that, and great way to wrap things up. And some really great insights. And I guess both of you, I know, sort of have followed your career and know you guys are both real leaders in the profession, and maybe not so many people would know because you're not super prominent, putting out there and on social media and things like that. But I know the quality of what you guys deliver, so it's really great to have you on board and to openly share some of those insights. And I know people listening to that as up and coming physios will find it really beneficial. So a big thanks for your time, and also to Dave for his insights around what he does. So thanks very much for joining us.